Hey, welcome back, guys, to our podcast, Joe to Joe. We're your hosts, Joe,
And Tojo,
and today we're going to be talking about education. What are your initial thoughts about education?
well, as a graduate of the private and public system, private all the way up to eighth grade, and then public the rest of the way, I think the education system's relatively good, but there's always a lot of room for improvement, especially as our culture is always changing, where it's more adapting more technology or adapting to the different forms of communication among generations.
Yeah. Was there any problems specifically within your private and public institutions that you were like, I wish it was different? You said there's room for improvement. What kind of improvement can there be?
When I was in private school, uh, I definitely think it was like really nerve wracking to always be in the same class, essentially group of people every year. With that being said, like that creates a lot of like social standing or like hierarchiness within among students, because if you're like if any student for any reasons dislike one year, then that's like subconsciously internalized in different years, and that proved to be very prevalent among for a lot of students in the private school that I went to, and many students opting out to just go to a different school because of like feeling like an outcast. However, I stuck the gun because I was just my mom told me I had to go there, and the same people that didn't like me all the years, so like I still don't talk to them, and not to say like I didn't change over time, and maybe if they had reasons why, but like then doing those types of things encourages that. And another thing they do is like punishment systems inside schools. Like an example of this, like obviously, when you're younger, you pull cards for like when you do something misbehave, right? But in reality, I don't like that system because it indirectly teaches all other students, oh, that kid's a bad kid. So I was raised to stay away from bad kids, and so let's leave them alone. And that also creates a dynamic and social standing that really doesn't like basically offer forgiveness among people at a lower age.
Yeah. You're like that social adaptability that students have to have. It's like there's this social structure within schools, and if you're not accepted, and you kind of fall into this category where you can become insecure, and it becomes not only harder for you to develop friends, but also harder for you to focus on like classes and education. And I'm just thinking, is there any way for us to kind of overcome that, for more students to feel comfortable in their setting? Is it right to feel comfortable, or should there be that uncomfort? When should we draw the line?
It's hard to say, especially like look at a broader spectrum to see what works and what doesn't work. I like to think the best way to approach classrooms is like to grow as a family. Like in those situations, like those classes, like you kind of want all your students to be all brothers and sisters that really bond together, right? That's like the ideal way of going about it. But like, and like I think it's like a simple way of just changing the way systems work. Like, is like pulling cards really an effective way of teaching kids bad behavior, or is like shaming a kid for doing bad behavior really the right way to educate them on what to do, right? Like pointing out the bad and pointing out the good, is that like what really affects a child? I think researching, I don't know about too much about that, but I think research has shown that positive affirmation has proven to be a little bit more impactful on kids than it does punishments. However, there's always going to be a fine line of gray area of like, well, clearly the reason why people punishment because like people overtake the affirmations and don't give any sort of discipline whatsoever. And then now you have rowdy kids that just think there's no consequences to any actions. So we have, it's like definitely like discovering that fine balance between the two will really help teach kids and educate kids on like good work ethics and communication skills.
Yeah, it definitely is something to take into consideration with positive, reinforcement for those children.
Yeah,
But the hard thing is that sometimes it can be helpful to kind of create this almost roller coaster effect, right? So you see these kids getting that positive reinforcement, and if they do something bad, I feel like it is something they should be punished for. I mean, they can't just get away with everything. We can't constantly reinforce them with that positivity. And I feel like back to that insecurity thing, people aren't focusing on education, and they'll just try to cheat the system and try to make sure that they get the A, sure, or they might not try at all. And I think it stems back to a lot of things. And one, we can look at politics, for example. The No Child Left Behind Act. It was initiated in 2002, signed by George Bush, basically saying that for every school, public institution, they need to have a system where we can benchmark. Okay, where are these kids lying in the academics? And we'll have these like I-step tests, right? You've had those tests before with those testing, to see, okay, where do you lie? Are you average? Are you above average? Are you below average? And although that is not bad when it comes to understanding where that kid lies, there are problems, especially when it comes to knowing what they're going to do with the information. Are they going to take that and put it into their career? Are they going to put it in their life?
Mm.
Or are they just going to learn it and then forget about it 2 weeks after they took the test? Or they're going to graduate high school, or they're going to move on from that and be like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything with that information.
Mm.
And I feel like with that education, we should really be valuing the not just the knowledge aspect, but the understanding aspect as well. Because if we're being
Application almost.
right, application, and if we're able to do that, I think more things will fall in line, such as, well, like students being able to feel more comfortable, or maybe not. But I feel like, honestly, in my opinion, it will. Because if
Mm.
all students were like that, they were able to apply that, they would have more of an understanding, a ground knowledge of how to not only do their own thing, but to feel more secure about themselves, to portray that to other people.
I
If
think
that
you,
makes sense.
yeah, I think you bring up a great topic because I firmly never, I firmly believe in the fact that you should answer children's questions within reason. Of course, like if they're outrageous, then sure, but like no question, like the people when people say no question is a bad question, I firmly believe that, especially when there are children, in general, like question like the school systems and stuff like that. Like if they're questioning what they should be prioritizing, I think they have every right to like question it. So when kids say, why when am I ever going to use geometry in my life, right? Or when am I ever going to use algebra in my life? I think rather than just saying you should learn it because it's curriculized and like this will help you like in different cognitive ways, like literally in applicable ways, like like for like geometry, like like a lot of kids ask like questions like what's the point of learning shapes? It's stupid, right? And then you see those exact kids love Legos and those types of things, and now they have a heart for crafting and construction, right? You could explain to them when building geometric shapes, you try slowly figure out what shapes are stronger than one another, which ones are more solid than one another, and end up building more stronger structures in the long term. So explaining that even as silly as like comparable as Legos, can you further understand like the geometric principles of like the need of the things around us? Like shapes are shapes, and knowing them is one thing, but like you slowly like making them realize the importance of them to begin with is always something that they deserve as children. Like, when am I ever going to use algebra? They deserve to know that. Like how can you make children want to learn if you're not going to explain to them why they're learning things?
Right. It's something that I feel that students should really be focusing on, and teachers and everyone in especially public institutions. I know you went to a private institution, but I really want to focus on that public institution.
Yeah.
Um, and we honestly, I believe we just have the system all wrong. And we've tried to reform this many times, but we failed so many times, especially in impoverished areas. Like a lot of
Mm.
students in poor areas are not able to get that same education, and it's because in those areas, the school is being funded due to the properties. The people living around them are paying and helping that institution. So, for example, a wealthier school with like wealthier people who live around it, who have like bigger properties, are able to pay that tax to the school, and that's also being applied to a poorer area where they're not able to have that much of a tax to pay for the school, so they're not able to have as good of a system where all schools aren't really focusing on that applicable stance. But now these impoverished areas are not even able to get that full knowledge base. So how are we supposed to get to the applicable parts if we're not even getting to the knowledge that these students should have? In fact, it is so bad in these impoverished areas that when it comes to a fifth grader in an impoverished area, they are 3 years behind than someone in a more wealthier area, in a better school, in a public institution. So imagine a fifth grader is at the same level as a second grader.
Mm.
An eighth grader is at the same level as a fifth grader. Isn't that insane to like see that? Like just the fact that an eighth grader has the same kind of on average statistically the same level as a fifth grader. I just
Well, then who's to blame for that system being in place still?
well, I
What
believe
needs to be reformed?
I believe that it's we need to go back to the root cause, which is how we're funding that school. You know how the government, the state, the federal government has decided. Okay, this is how we're going to pay for public institutions. I feel like we should be looking at how we are funding them entirely, how we are going about it, and it stems back to teachers are being paid based on that school, so they don't want to be at that school for long. They want to be in a wealthier area in that wealthy school. They feel safe, they feel comfortable. But if we could fund that school more so they can be better paid and better equipped, then it'll be much easier for them to want to learn and understand and be able to share that knowledge with other people. There's just so many holes in those areas that like students that are in those poor areas want to get out of that area, but how are they going to do that if they don't have the knowledge?
Mm.
It's just it comes back to what we know. Knowledge is power. At the end of the day, knowledge is power. So how are we supposed to be able to, you know, kind of change that if it's this bad?
I think you bring up very good points. However, the realization of how to deal with them, it seems very very hard to think about, because like it's a full circle, right? Like these kids are getting bad education because a school is poorly funded. It's poorly funded by the neighboring houses that are impoverished. But why are they impoverished and who's there, right? Like how do you just immediately like change that system, right? Because like is there a reason why that impoverished area is impoverished? Like is it simple as changing that impoverished area to not, and if so how? Or is it really just like we need to take money from other places and invest in the schools uh, that have less money? But another thing is like obviously I think the government puts in investment based off results, right? But what if a school just naturally puts out less results? Should that school still be invested in?
Hmm.
Like, I think that's what I think about immediately, because that's the whole reason why there's an imbalance. Uh, like I think like it's just like the very basic mindset. We naturally invest in what works. Why would you invest in something that doesn't work? And it may seem unfair for other people down the road, but like if you're looking straight up above these skyscrapers, right? Like you're just gonna see like that's been working and that's not. So what do you think we should do about that?
Well, you're looking at it as such a capitalistic, money driven point of view. Okay, that's the thing that you're misconstruing here.
Well, money's like what helps us survive. For the most part, is not.
Yeah, but
That's why good teachers leave those bad areas for.
exactly, but how are we supposed to be able to, you know, increase the ability to make money if you don't have the knowledge to begin with? I mean, it all stems back to knowledge, right? I mean, people get jobs based on the knowledge they know. People are able to, have that financial literacy to be able to afford things, invest into things, and all whatnot because they have that knowledge. How are they going to have that knowledge if they can't do it whatsoever? We should take that risk knowing that they're not doing so well because I mean it's not being funded properly. They're not getting funded as well as the other schools. Obviously, the other schools are going to do better because they're being funded more and they're able to actually give the students a proper education.
Mm,
And it's also important to consider that due to the unsafe environment that those impoverished students are in, their brains are not able to cope with trauma as much. There's so much trauma that happens in those areas.
mm,
I mean, I'm sure you understand that
mm,
because the issue with trauma is that it becomes hard to learn when that blockade is causing you to not want to focus and not want to do those things. And there's also mental disabilities that are statistically more prevalent in impoverished areas. So I can see where you're coming from. When why should we invest in that area if I mean they might not do as well anyway. But how do we know unless we don't try?
mm. I mean, it's a very valid hypothesis. And another question is just like, where we're going to take away this funding to reinvest in these schools? Because if I'm being honest, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of them, and it won't be like a small like a dollar amount to make the switch from providing more resources for those types of children. Sorry, for those impoverished people.
Yeah.
Is it like raising taxes? Is it taking monies from other places? What's the move?
Well, I feel that the government should step in a little bit more when it comes to paying for schools. Um, where it comes to where we take that money from, I don't know. This is a possibility. Maybe the military. We fund so much of the military. Can we afford to take a little bit out for some schools?
I don't know.
Maybe we should experiment. Maybe we should look into a school that's not doing so well, and
We
if
could send the kids to the military. Sorry.
yo, yeah, let's send them to the military. I mean, we're already funding that. Might as well.
Might as well.
um, yeah, it's school should be funded. School should be funded more from the government, and it shouldn't be so relied on the people around it. I can understand more wealthier areas; they can afford it,
Yeah.
but it's when they're already having troubles with like because some people are working 2 3 jobs in those areas. They can barely afford their own house as it is. They can't afford to pay for the school that they go to really, and it's not fair for them to have to rely on them to pay for those schools. Um, but where that money comes from is a sketchy area, whether it's the military a little bit or from other parts. Maybe the state, not just the federal. Maybe the state comes in and we
Yeah.
look at how they fund it. But I kind of want to segue a little bit.
Yeah.
So I want to look at how in recent years, I kind of referenced the No Child Left Behind Act. From there, at the Every Student Success Act came into play later on down the line um, with Obama, and that kind of focusing on the state to rely on where that the students kind of are progressing in and not just like this forced level of what and how students should be benchmarked. But with recent years due to COVID, right, with the pandemic and all that stuff, people had to go in their own homes. They had to be uh, outcasted. We had to separate everyone due to the disease, and with that came um, the issue of students having a harder time focusing. They don't have the access to uh, counselors and stuff to focus on what we were talking about earlier with that social fear and all that stuff. So what do you think about that due to how the pandemic all happened and students were able to get access to as many students as people, or the teachers weren't able to like access them, so they weren't able to help them as much on their homework and they were able to cheat easier. What do you think about that?
I think that's a lot to unwrap, but I'm gonna tackle it separately. I think when it comes to the inherent incapability of student to student interaction and student to teacher interaction, I think it definitely immediately creates less bonds within our community, which is like such a huge valued thing. Like back in the day, people used to just like, hey, want to go to my house after school, or and stuff like that because they didn't have telephones or anything, and then they would ask their parents and they'd work out, right? I act like I'm such an old guy, right? But no, if without those interactions, you're not creating those communication skills, like those students that are like realizing they have leadership type capabilities, they're not realizing they have those capabilities, or those students that have like adaptable capabilities to stressful environments, like they're not realizing those traits. And so there's like a lot of traits that students naturally develop in school that aren't being developed anymore because of that separation. Same thing, like the most crucial one of all, communication. Like people are time and time again are getting less capable of being able to communicate different messages, what they want, because of the lack of interaction, and that really showed during the pandemic, because group projects aren't the same, less efforts being put in. It's more like a divide and conquer thing always. It's never like a compromise or actually see what these four brilliant minds can really innovate, right? It's just like, let's get the job done and separate, go about our days. And I just feel like the pandemic really discouraged good communication skills. And the people that really like, there's always those people that really wanted to get out there. High schools are time to meet new friends and stuff like that, try new things. And now that if they wanted to, they couldn't even because the pandemic separating all the people from one another. And same thing with teacher, like the teacher student to teacher bond. Like I feel like it's less encouraged for the teachers to like really like create a bond with their students without like going the extra mile for each individual one, which is already hard because it's virtual. And like, let's be honest, we're in like our own homes. It's very easy, just like I don't want to be here type of scenario every time you're on a video call with people. And sure, the video calls it's an all right substitute, but will never replace like the one-on-one interaction, right? Like that's why like long distance relationships are hard. Like you're just that much distance away. Like you can't tell me that FaceTime equates to them being right next to you. It's not.
Oh, of course not. And it's just when that teacher, like you said, isn't going the extra mile, then it's really hard for the student
Yeah.
to care about the education.
Oh
And
yeah.
I've seen many instances where kids would literally sleep, like they would enter in the call. Guilty.
I'm not guilty.
uh, they would sleep in the call. They would just enter it and have their face off, and they like wouldn't care. They wouldn't actually be learning anything.
Yeah.
And it's got to the point where students would, after the pandemic was over, they would come back and they would still have that like mindset of just, well, I was already in that kind of that level of just not caring. I didn't put that much effort in. My teacher didn't care as much. We were separated. They couldn't see what I was doing. When I took my tests, they didn't see that I was cheating. They didn't see I was on a Snapchat call or Instagram call. They didn't see that I was doing these things so I could just do whatever I wanted.
Mm.
And it led to them not being able to get an education. And
Yeah.
scores plummeted. Scores got way worse after COVID. The benchmark tests to see with iStep, whatever, it lowered significantly. And it was just the biggest start to a decline in especially public education.
Mm.
And I don't know. I just don't know what at this point can happen with improving that, because is it just waiting for the system to just repeat itself? Should we just let it slide and let these
Mm.
students just continue and go in their merry way and just hope that they pick it themselves back up?
Mm.
Or will this continue to go? Will this just develop into a big snowball effect where they don't actually apply anything and they continue that onto their children?
I want to be optimistic that these children want to make these changes and want to grow these ways. The only solution I can realistically think of is just like leave it up to them, provide a service for them to be like an adequate service, not just a throwaway service of some way, shape, or form to gain back these scenarios, whether it be reapplying into class or integrating it like outside of school, and then just having the kids like if they want to apply to learn more about these things, they can. But if they don't, they don't. Because like we also have to make the argument that like there's always going to be that demographic of people that just don't care, and like some skills are just like learned unintentionally, and this way like at least these students value these types of skills in the first place. They can make a choice to at least learn more about them if they want to, whether it be like make an extracurricular that advocates for like team building exercises, or I mean like schools already do that kind of like in other ways to make substitutes for them. Not saying that like this is the solution, but you can't really already undo what's been done. But you can like try to make the case that like here's a service we can provide. You can choose if you want to try to like make back lost time or accept what's happened, because at the end of the day bad things happen all the time. People have to adapt, and the strong people or the strong students that overcome and rise above these situations will always do so, because they never let these small things get in the way of progress. Progress will always continue. Every generation, that generation has more than what they started with, and the more capabilities of using that to learn more. So every generation that goes by, you'll never lose information, or never lose like knowledge, so to speak, because knowledge will always exist and always be passed down. It's whether those people want to don that and accept it and move on with it.
So we should just let it slide.
not say let it slide, but like at the end of the day, like you can't do too much to control it, in my opinion. You can't force someone to have communication skills. You can't force someone to be a good team leader.
Well, yeah, we can't force them, but what can we do to help them want to do it? Like,
I
should we
mean,
do that? Or should we care enough to?
school has time and time again just said like I want to convince you to value what we have to offer, but at the end of the day, it's up to those kids' choices. Like, do I value this? If I'm not, I'm gonna put less effort into it. I'm gonna take shortcuts. I'm gonna cheat, right? If I don't value it, they'll just not value it, and like they'll choose not to learn it.
But if well, let's go back to the applicable thing. Like, if students apply the things they genuinely want to learn, then they'll become more passionate and they'll care about coming to school and they'll care about developing communication skills. So,
I think that's a lot of things out. Like if I'm being honest, it's kind of a little bit outside the hands of the school. They can't make a student want to be there.
but that's where I believe maybe more of the government comes in. How
Can the
can
government make a student want to be there?
not necessarily, but we can do things to ensure that it is more of an experience that the student will want and care to learn.
Why do you do that?
Well, first of all, we need to consider funding. Well, that's the first step we talked about earlier. The second step is, well, we need to ask what the student wants. We need to actually care about that. The counselor needs to come in and say, hey, what's going on? Is everything okay?
Well,
Let's really open them up.
well, is it the student's job or is it the school or government's job to find out what the student wants, or the parent's job?
Well,
'Cause I think the parent. It sounds like the parents like have a big like say in what the students want. Because like I mean, this is a very like rare situation. But what if a kid wants to go to trade school and their parents are like 1,000% against that, and now they do bad in academics, right? Well, is it their fault for wanting to go to trade school, or is it the school fault for having bad academics?
well, I believe everyone plays a role into it. The student,
I mean,
um,
yeah, I agree with that.
right, and the student has like a level of responsibility for doing what he needs to be told, because at this
Yeah.
point, I mean, it's up to themselves. But I believe it's also um, the parents' role, because if they decide to send them off into trade school or decide to a charter school or a private institution, that's up to them. But then from there, the school foundation, the government, and all that stuff can set the materials for them to then consider. Okay, is it something I want to do? Well, here, take this for instance. If they're in a school where they feel the teachers are shunning them, and they're like putting that negative reinforcement all the time, whether like instead of that negative and positive reinforcement, trying to kind of balance that out, maybe a little bit more positive reinforcement, then why would the kid care to learn? The kid will develop a hate for school. They will
Mm.
no longer feel like knowledge is important to them, because to them, in their eyes, it is
A waste of time.
a waste of time, because they're being treated poorly. They're being, you know, put in a world where they're not valued. They're not getting that attention that they so desire. And that's especially in impoverished schools when they're not being funded as much.
Yeah.
Those things definitely apply there. They apply in every public school, but especially those ones. In any school entirely, but public schools, impoverished schools. And I want to talk on another thing that COVID kind of caused, and that was a race for technology, right? Because when we went down, we went on Zoom calls, we went on Google Meets, and
Yeah.
we had to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to make and ensure
Make
that,
up for education.
yeah, what are we going to do to make sure that these servers can keep running and all these students can be online and all these computers can be running effectively on these apps and stuff. And that caused a surge in the development of these apps, and that caused a surge in the development of social media, and that caused students to become more easily involved in their phone, because
Mm.
social media was much easier to access due to the development that was so quickly put onto them, and them being in their own homes with nothing to do. What other thing to do than go on TikTok, right? I mean, some students will
I'd make the argument the students have the choice to make use of their time.
exactly. I get that, but when they are kind of put into this illusion where they are in the
Trapped.
house, yeah, they feel trapped and they are bored and they don't know what else to do, but they have a phone in their hand. They're like, okay, well, let me go on this TikTok app. Well, now they're scrolling for 4 hours before they even know it. The end of the day is here, and then they become addicted to their phone.
Mm.
And that also has contributed to why education is less valued after the pandemic. Once they came back into schools, they continued to use their phone as much as they could.
I think specifically for that, that's just like a that sending goes for like it's mainly the students a student. I think it's mainly the student's discipline than the school's responsibility. Because at the end of the day, like we can't take the schools, like the school can't be responsible for a culture loving their phone more because the school like advocates against that. Like how can you say the school advocating a school advocates for that type of behavior? I mean, it just sounds hard.
Yeah, but I did find out when I went to Purdue, the main campus, they actually shut down TikTok for everyone.
Really?
Yeah, so when you go on their Wi-Fi, you cannot access TikTok. I found that out when I went there this weekend.
That's like next level stuff though for like a high school.
Well, true, but I mean, is it? Well, like if they hire a team that can set up,
Well,
like,
that's more government investing in
well, and
these
there you
types
go.
of
That's
things.
another role the government can play,
Yeah,
and that's something that we should consider.
and that's something we should talk about next time.
Yes, next time. So, join us next episode when we talk about the problems with social media and technology. I do want to point out one more thing, however, um, that the the U.S. Department of Education has put in a lot of money into
Investment. Yeah.
investing it, and it has also increased that as well. $30 billion to be exact. I just want to point that out. $30 billion. Put that on your minds as you think about that going forward with this time of day. I hope you enjoyed our podcast. I hope you guys have a merry day. Happy holidays.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.